All right. Let's get this started, shall we? Ian says, is a format played exclusively in one country? Brackets, the 100. What else would we be talking about? Sustainable long term. If yes, how do you then grow it? If no, how long before it becomes a T20 competition? Look, I mean, I suppose we only have one real, other than the start of T20, we probably only have one real tournament that's ever done anything like this, the Pro 40. I look at Pro 40 in a way similar to Betamax. It was obviously a better product than VHS. Actually, maybe that's not even the right way of putting it because it was around after. But it was obviously the superior product. But the rest of the world never took up Pro 40. And they kept going with the 50 over game. You know, in my long history of watching one days, I much preferred the 40 over game than the 50 over game. I just thought it was a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more enjoyable. It still had the ability to, you know, play long innings and you know, you still saw a lot of bowlers, but you also took out just 10 overs that, I don't know, maybe superfluous is the wrong way of putting it. No one else ever seemed to care. Now, Pro 40 wasn't exactly the 100, right? The 100 is a big tournament. It'll go on to probably be the second biggest tournament in domestic cricket if it's, you know, nurtured correctly, just because it has the second biggest audience, can make the second most money, all those sorts of things. Well, not the second biggest audience, but the second biggest audience that gives them money. You know, India is the richest cricket nation. England is the second richest cricket nation, right? So you would expect it to, if it is in any way nurtured correctly, go on to be at least top two. At least top three. Hopefully top two if they've done it correctly. If it is in that, you know, scenario, is it possible that then we start to see more other leagues doing it? The problem is that it came from the 100 came from a very, what's the best way of putting it? The 100 came about because of a marketing decision and a little bit of the BBC wanted the games to be slightly shorter. What other country wants the games to be shorter? Right? It doesn't really make sense. You actually want the product to go as long as it goes. You get more viewership, you get more streaming time, you get more social media posts. So this was very much done around the BBC and around Mumsnet, the website. I'm not going to get fully into the whole discussion on that. But if you go to a bunch of people who don't like something and say, we can do less of it, of course they're going to say yes, rather than what probably should have been done is we can make the games a little bit tighter by playing 120 balls, but 60 balls at one end and then 60 balls at the other, which is, you know, an idea I've been talking about a lot. And I think the first tournament who's going to do that is going to be the 60 in the West Indies, which they should have done for the 100, obviously, and then they could have had their 120 balls and everything would have been fine. And they still would have been completely improvising and coming up with new rules and everything else, because that was always going to be part of it. I just don't see what, if you were copying it, I just don't see why you wouldn't go for 60 balls at that point. So I think there's certainly, I think there's certainly some errors within it. I don't see anyone using 100 balls just because it was a unique situation. Perhaps, though, if it becomes so popular, you might get some cricket boards that are like, look, we don't really care that much about the 100 ball concept, but if it gives us a chance to look like we're doing something new and our, you know, 120 ball tournament isn't working as well as we'd like, maybe someone will try it. But I find it very hard. And then you look into what you're saying, the sustainability of it. I don't know. It seems to create more headaches in some senses, but it is essentially just a T20 tournament with a different name, right? So maybe you can just keep it around for a long time. Or is it one of those things that after like 5 or 6 years, as well as the 100's going, they just change it back to 120 balls and we all laugh a little bit, but the tournament's going fine, so it doesn't matter? I don't know. It's a really good question, though. Christopher says, if the landscape of cricket is going to be very T20 league heavy, surely one of the most important things is the coverage starts to get better, like what your previous video alludes to. Yeah, this is the really interesting thing at the moment, is that no one has really nailed the coverage of T20 cricket. There's a lot of people who cover it, but even so, I'm hoping the IPL was the one that would work it out. But part of the BCCI doesn't really like working with media. It's never been, one of their things. There aren't many cricket boards who do. Obviously, the IMG side of it probably would prefer it to come on. There's certainly, I think if you follow the IPL now, you could see where the bloggers, the tweeters, the YouTube creators are starting to do that. But then you go back to Cricinfo or CricBuzz, which are still the gold standards. They're still very much set up for international cricket. And I don't think either of them has the ability within their business model to pivot. Obviously, this is part of the reason I set up 99.94 is to do what you're talking about, Christopher. But you're right. I think because cricket has always been such a match reporty sport, right? Which is most sports are, but cricket certainly was a very high level of match reports. The match report from a T20 game means less than a test game, and I think most people can work those two things out. And realistically, what you should be looking for from T20 games is themes and things to analyze, and that's not really how young or newer cricket writers have been trained. And so you get this thing when the match report doesn't really matter anymore, but no one's willing to go away from the match report, and you don't have enough people who've been trained in how to do proper analysis and how to look for themes and all these sorts of things. But as I said, that sort of Twitter, blogging space, YouTube, all these sorts of people, I do think that is happening in the IPL. And if it happens in the IPL, it might happen at other places. The problem is, Christopher, is that can you make money being an IPL blogger at the moment? Even a high-end one? My guess is no. It's 3 months of the year. You might get another 2 months of, auction stuff and, run into the tournament. What do you do with the rest of the year? And what we haven't seen at the moment is people sort of do the more Freddie Wild thing, which is where you focus on all of T20. And, even Freddie Wild eventually worked in T20 because that was where the money was. So there is a problem here. But I think a lot of the problem is the fact that it's all little leagues still. I think as the IPL becomes bigger, and maybe even as some of the other tournaments swell a little bit, that will slightly be taken away. But I do think the problem is, at the moment, the pop-up nature of the T20 leagues. And then you get the pop-up coverage. Someone who was really good last year has gone off to get a better job. And that happens a lot. And I think what really needs to happen is more coverage of T20 as a proper sport. And I just don't think that Cricinfo or CricBuzz are set up for that. And because we don't really have great alternatives to those sites, it really does means that someone else is going to have to come in and sweep it up. And there are some good websites coming through that are doing some good coverage, but I don't think they have the money. And obviously, we're hoping 99.94 part of the plan there is to cover these T20 leagues and these T20 teams directly. That's why our model is team-based. We're looking at this in a very different way than how the other two websites were created, because they were created nation by nation, really. Sorry if you can hear my son singing in the shower, everyone. Nort says, do we know if the ECB has tried to sell the 100 format into any other cricket-playing nations, a EuroLeague or Brazil or the States? I think that was their original thought. They trademarked it. Again, to go back to Ian's question, why would you buy it? I don't really understand why you would do that why you would pay the ECB any money when you can just do it yourself. You just do a normal T20 league. If you want, you could get a couple of consultants in that would be far cheaper than paying the ECB again. Trent Woodhill, who helped the ECB set up the 100, is available. I've talked to leagues and people who want to set up things. There's plenty of consultants out there. You get Freddie Wild that would be available for that. I just don't see why you would do that. And when you talk about the States are going after T20 cricket. So Major League Cricket will be a T20 competition. Minor League Cricket is already a T20 competition. Again, I don't see the advantages of the 100 in those places. Especially if you're a developing nation. The only time I see it as being something would be, let's say, I don't know, the Sri Lankan League, right? The Lankan Premier League, after 5 years, it's just not really popping and the audiences aren't really getting excited or whatever. I could see then a sort of 100 reinvention. They might be like, oh, we'll do this because the 100's doing really well, so we're going to do this and we're going to call it the Lunken 100. I could see that. I can't see why a Brazilian or a European or an American team would do that, because they're getting, their audiences don't care if it's 100 or 120 balls anyway. They don't have to pay the ECB a licensing fee. It would be actually the best situation for those leagues would be if they were like, we're going to start a league, we're not sure what to do. ECB, were you interested in paying for our league? And then we'll call it the 100. Which is a possibility, I suppose, as well. But yeah, I just don't, see the point. If you came to me as a consultant today, I'd be like, well, no, let's just start a T20 league or a T10 league and go from there. Satchmo says, why have so many left-wing writers love cricket, given that it's mainly played by right-wing people? Well, I think the best thing there, Satchmo, is that most writers are left-wing. I think it's a harder... I don't think writing is a particularly natural... skill for right-wing people. I don't think it's the way that conservative style people work. That doesn't mean that there haven't been conservative writers and there won't continue to be. But as a general rule, I think writing is probably done better by people with a more open mind, more curious, more left-brained for whatever reason that may be. People who have empathy, people who are willing to open up. All those sorts of things probably come from a more left-wing space to begin with. So I think, writing is probably, in left-wing circles is probably seen as a worthy thing to do. And I think in probably more conservative circles, writing is seen as nonsense and a bit of bullshit, right? So I think in general, writers are more left-wing than the population at large. Apologies to Ayn Rand. And no apologies to Ayn Rand. She was an absolutely shit writer. Incredible that people still read her books. Her books are unfucking readable. But yeah, so I think that's the case. And then, so I don't think it's that left-wing writers love cricket is the right way of framing that. I think it's the fact that if you have an endeavour like cricket that is so great to write about, and then you have great writers more come over to it, they're going to go. Also, it's fun to go against the grain at a certain point. But I think that, it goes back to the, what was the whole ESPN thing that the right wing, go woke, go broke. You look at the ESPN writers, and you do think this is a incredibly left-wing collection of writers at ESPN in America. Although you could put Cricinfo in that as well. And they're not always writing for a left-wing audience. So sports fans are far more conservative in whole. The whole go woke, go broke thing, of course, was absolute nonsense. The reason ESPN was going broke was because people were cutting the cable ties. But, never let the alt-right actually look for truth in any of these things. So I currently, Satchmo, I work for TalkSport. The TalkSport production setup is far more left-wing than the TalkSport listenership. The whole Sun, it's the Times and the Sun building. Again, the people in that building are, by and large, far more progressive than the people who read their newspapers or listen to their radio stations or anything else. So I don't think this is a cricket-specific thing. If you want to look at some cricket-specific aspects of this, I think that what cricket writing does, and probably what football writing allows you to do, maybe basketball writing is the other one, touches of tennis and athletics maybe play into this as well, is it does let you talk about a lot of different cultures. It does allow you to have more topics and to understand more countries. And I think if you're a writer, I can only talk from my personal view, and I remember having a chat with this about Jonathan Liew. He wasn't talking about cricket specifically, but sport. Sport allows Jonathan Liew to talk about economics and business and PR stuff and social problems and moral problems and ethics and all these sorts of things in a way that a lot of other news-led writing doesn't allow you to do. So I do think that cricket in that, if you look traditionally, probably from World War II through to now, if you're a good writer and you like cricket, it kind of sucks you in because, the ability to write about the subcontinent, the ability to write about the West Indian Islands, the ability to write about South Africa, the ability to write about, New Zealand and Australia and the cricket teams and how the cricket teams have shaped their culture and all these different things. And now Afghanistan and Brazil and Thailand, and Nepal. So I do believe that there is an element of that, but just as a very, very general rule, Satchmo, I do think that people writers are more left wing than quite often the audiences they're writing for. James says, any thoughts on young spinners Verdi and Moriarty at Surrey? Neither have played counter game this year, despite excellent returns the last few seasons. Yeah, I think they were pushed a lot. I think Surrey has changed under Gareth Batty as a team. I think they were pushed a lot at times when they probably weren't ready, but maybe played on the right surfaces. I know that, their head coach is a spinner, so he would want them. I haven't talked to him directly about that, but I think the general feeling at Surrey was that they know they both have talent. It's really about whether they can do it game after game. And they probably now have the ability within their team that they think they can that they don't need that as much. And maybe the pitches have changed down at Surrey. I haven't seen as much cricket at Surrey this year. I've seen more Kent this year. It's kind of the problem with living halfway between the two. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. My thoughts, I haven't seen as much of Moriarty actually, but my thoughts on Verdi, who many think will be a future England spinner, is that he's about 85% of the way there, but that last 15% has felt like it hasn't come for a long time now. And so you're getting to the point where you're either waiting for him to mature and work out what he needs to do to make that work, or we're in a situation where what he is what he is, and Surrey need to make a decision on that. But I think part of the problem with Surrey is just they've got too much talent. They've got so much talent to fit into any one team. That isn't really a problem. Both of those guys are probably playing for other teams just because there's a spot available for them. Maybe at Surrey there isn't. Aditya says, who would you rate as the best white ball all-rounders that you have seen? I think Afridi, Jayasuriya, Dhoni, Gilchrist, Pollard, and Russell would be at the top. Yeah, you probably throw Sun Ryan in. I'd certainly have Lance Klusner in that. I think he is completely forgotten, and hopefully I'll have a big project coming out on him for the World Cup. I think he's certainly up there. Chris Harris is a really interesting one. Go back and have a look at the role that he played within New Zealand. His numbers don't pop off the page, but when you think he was a high usage bowler, batting in the top six, and also given a role that kind of didn't exist before Michael Bevan, and he had to sort of nail it on the run. I'd have to go back and have a look at Chris Cairns' figures, but I can only assume that Chris Cairns was certainly one of the top all-rounders. Yeah, I don't think I'd put Ben Stokes in that. Ian Botham's another one that you wouldn't put in that necessarily. I suppose Kapil Dev, based on his hitting ability and his bowling. Viv Richards is an interesting one, although he went for a lot. He did have quite a high bowling economy, which he should have because he probably shouldn't have been bowling that much. Well, how about we throw Darren Lehman in, who has oddly good bowling figures realistically for the talent of bowler he was, Aditya. Trying to think of anyone else. I think someone like Chiminda Vaz would be quite an interesting talent now. Where do you put Andrew Simons in that when you factor in his fielding as well? Trying to think of some more all-roundery talents. But yeah, I think Shakib Al Hassan you haven't got there. Oh, you missed the big guy. For a long period of time, Shakib was incredible. Muhammad Nabi is probably another one I would put there as well. So I think if you look at the very, very best, I think Shakib has to go into that list that you had before. He had a period where I thought he was brilliant as a T20 player. It probably isn't his best format, but as a one-day player, certainly, that for a long period of time, he would go down as one of the best all-rounders that white ball cricket's ever had. Sorry, one-day cricket's ever had. Ravi Jadeja is another interesting one there as well. And Moeen Ali, I suppose. They're both a little bit flawed, but we're thinking about them more from T20 perspective, perhaps. But they're both certainly going to end up with really interesting numbers based on the way that they have played and their skill sets. So they probably deserve to be in that conversation as well. Neil says, I've recently decided to take up spin bowling. Awesome. As my body can't handle pace bowling anymore. But that's most people. At least Neil's 36 as well. Can you think of any examples of players who have successfully changed roles later on in their career, having done their initial role at a decent level? E.g., not like Giles or Broad, who roles changed when they were young. Yeah, of course, Neil. Colin Miller is probably your spirit animal. He was, a medium fast seamer from Victoria, never really took off, ends up in Tasmania, and then, he's wobbling it around a little bit. Colin Miller was very much an England-style seamer, not so much an Australian-style seamer. And then for Tasmania, he starts bowling these really fast off-spin. And he ends up playing for Australia as a fast off spinner. Still bowls a little bit of seam up for Australia, but Australia didn't really need his seam up. They just used it because it was an extra skill he had. So that's a very good one. Of recent times, one of the great ones has got to be George Dockrell, who, when he came through as a left-arm finger spinner in Ireland, was a potential England spinner. You watch him now. He still bowls a little bit, but he's a batter. Really now, he's almost a batter and part-time spin bowler now at most, and a lot of games he just doesn't bowl at all. That's an incredible one. Callum McLeod did a similar one, although he was a little bit earlier, but Callum McLeod was a bowler at Warwickshire, became a batter at Durham, went on to be a batter for Scotland, obviously, and has had a fantastic career as an associate player. For those who haven't seen Callum McLeod, he's just one of the smartest batters that you'll come across. I hate saying nice things about him. Hopefully no one tells him I have. But, he's extraordinary. Andy McBride's another one at Ireland recently, of course, who's the pinch blocker going up the order. You've then got, guys like Ravi Shastri and Mark Richardson. Probably did it a little bit earlier than what you're talking about. Certainly not at your age. They weren't changing at 36. But you're talking about their two players who came in one role, and by the end of their careers were completely sort of a different player. Although Shastri could still bowl, but he just continued to develop his game. We've talked about the all-rounders a lot as well. You get someone like Vittori, who probably starts off as a bowler who can hold the bat, ends up as a genuine genuine all-rounder, but certainly almost a batting all-rounder. And Jadeja is another one sort of pushing towards that sort of thing. Trying to think of anyone else that has managed to do that. I'm trying to think of anyone in first-class cricket who suddenly changed what they do. There must be someone I'm not thinking of as well. Kyle Mayers is quite interesting, of course, who started his career as a bowler, very much in a Colin Miller type of pace, medium-fast bowler. Then starts to make a lot of runs and is kind of picked on the back of his batting. And every time you kind of think he's a batter, he then takes a bunch of wickets and doesn't make any runs, and then he makes a big innings again. So he's a really interesting one, but certainly a kind of late changing player. I'm trying to think if there is anyone else. Jim Parks is another interesting one. So Jim Parks was a batter in county cricket in England, decides to start wicket keeping, and then gets picked as a wicket keeper quite late, quite early into his development. Jim Parks is probably not talked about enough. I think he died recently. I think that's right. And he's certainly a player who has managed to, he's changed in many ways. He was the first prototype of a batter who became a keeper. So I'm not talking about, the great early wicketkeeper batters or batter wicketkeepers that there were, They were wicket keepers who happened to be extraordinary batters. I'm sort of taking that aside, whereas Jim Parks was a batter who sort of took up wicket keeping very, very late on. Wasn't a wicket keeper when he was, coming through at the start of his career. It certainly has happened, Neil. It's a thing that cricket is so specialised. I think you probably almost need it. I almost think it should have happened more with pace bowlers who start to bowl spin later on. That kind of Graham Wagg did it for Gilbert Morgan for years. The ability to bowl fast spin. Franklin Stevenson sort of did it. It's kind of how slow balls were invented. In fact, because of the slow ball got so Franklin Stevenson slow ball got so well known, he sort of went away from off spin, but he's a perfect example of someone who could have become a very good off spinner. based on the amount of revs he could get on the ball, if nothing else. And do you count Moeen Ali, Neil, in that? Again, didn't really bowl much when he was younger. So, I think there's a few situations where between batting and bowling, the skill sets are so different that I wonder if in future it'll be harder for that to happen. But within bowling, you could certainly see why a fast bowler might turn towards spin if they have that skill within them. But it doesn't seem to happen much. It happens a lot in club cricket, as we all know. Great questions on Patreon. But anyway, again, I don't know why I clapped then, but I did clap. Thanks to everyone. Great questions. Great Spotify Live. Remember, 99.94 has started its podcast. So get out there, listen to the West Indies on 99.94. Their first episode without me was about West Indies ODI cricket. It was fantastic. I love Caribbean Cricket Podcast, but I absolutely love that episode. The guys completely got what I was going for with 99.94. We also have India on 99.94 with Nikesh and Sarah. I don't think I've heard their first episode, although it's probably out there. But just go to your podcast devices, right? And search for these things. We'll be adding more and more teams over the next little while, and the idea is to have, get the major international teams covered and then go off after domestic leagues and franchise leagues and first class cricket. We want to cover everything. And we're setting that up. So if you can support us by subscribing and rating and reviewing the India and the West Indies podcast, that's huge for us. And also just a huge thanks to Spotify Live people. If you want to ask me a question, download the app, come in, follow me on Instagram or Twitter. We send out the links there, and follow us here. And it allows us to make these episodes, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to do that on the 99.94 network right across it, and so you'll be able to ask all the different hosts different questions. But huge thanks to you, and I'll talk to you again next time.